Nakamura managed to win the second match, and you know what that means? That means that we have some Blitz games and eventually Armageddon at our hands. And this is a Blitz game Nakamura needs to win because Lagrave won the first Blitz game. So if Nakamura draws or loses, he is out of the tournament. So there is a Nakamura with high pressure on his shoulders here against Lagrave. So let's see how the game went. D4, certainly slightly surprising, knowing that we have seen E4 mostly from Nakamura. But alright, Knight of 6 from Lagrave. He wants to play his Grunfeld with G6 and D5. His pet line. But then Nakamura surprises us and he plays Bishop G5, which is the Trampowski. It's certainly an interesting try. I'm sure he just wanted a position with no particular theory or whatsoever, although there is some theory here. I think he just wanted to surprise Maxime a bit. Considering that this is a Blitz game, it does make some sense to just get a position and take it from there, because a theoretical duel in the Grunfeld is definitely going to benefit Maxime, who is a huge expert on that field. D5 from Maxime, E3, C5, fairly reminiscent play from Black of a London defense. Very standard to play C5 and challenge the center here. C3 from Nakamura, Queen B6, Queen C1, and indeed it more or less would have been in London if the bishop was on F4, but it is on G5, which makes a slight difference, although not very huge. Bishop F5 from Lagrave is a logical move, developing the bishop. Knight D2. Keep in mind that this is Blitz, so they are playing very fast here. Knight D7, Knight F3, and E6. Both sides are developing logically, and I must say, Lagrave has a nice position already. He is probably even slightly better. Definitely not slightly worse. But it is Blitz, so anything can happen. Knight H4 from Nakamura. He wants to take this beautiful light squared bishop here. And Lagrave plays Bishop E4. This makes sense because now it's not ideal to take at all. In fact, it more or less loses after Knight takes E4. And after Bishop F4, G5 with a fork. But in general, it's not really ideal anyway, because D takes E4 is always quite unpleasant because of the fact that this knight hangs in many lines with H6, G5. But here it doesn't work by tactical reasons, as I mentioned. But just to keep that in mind. A4, a typical move. You want to play A5 and chase away the queen. Also, Bishop B5 is sometimes in the air. A6 is another logical way to counter that. No Bishop E5 now. Bishop E2 instead. H6, and the bishop is now forced to take on the F6. So this is not really that great for white. G5 could come eventually. Black has a nice position, and Lagrave, all he needs now is a draw, and then he is going to play against Wesley So, I believe. But is he going to manage to hold the draw? That is the question, and we're gonna see soon. So knight takes C4, D takes E4, and now G5 is a threat. So Nakamura is more or less forced to play G3, giving the knight the G2 square here. Bishop E7. Lagrave doesn't want to play G5, which is fairly understandable, but it certainly is a logical try, and simply continue like this. Can't be bad, and then castle even queenside. But white's pieces are very poorly placed, and I think black's doing well. Of course, black can also castle kingside here, but that's slightly more risky when you play G5. However, Bishop E7, as I said, castles. And more than ever, now more than ever, G5 and H5 is fairly possible. G5 followed by H5, H4 it could potentially be a way to go. Although this sharpens the game significantly, and keeping in mind that Lagrave, he needs only a draw to go to the semifinals, this is probably not a good idea. So that is why he settled for the more quiet castles. He has a better position and no risk in the slightest here. So queen c2, rook c8 attacking on d4. So white is forced to defend that with the rook here. Rook d8, rook c1. It's not possible to take any longer because the rook protects the queen. So c takes d4, e takes c4. Now rook takes c4, as I said, is not possible because we simply take back and the rook protects the queen. So knight d5 from Lagrave, and Nakamura is now equalized. He is white, so it's not such a big deal, but knight d5 is slightly inaccurate, although it is a logical move. So he plays knight d5 and then followed by f5, which is, you know, slightly risky, because if I one day get to play f3 and I open up the e file here, it's gonna be very weak against the pawn on e6, and that is something you do not really want. But did Nakamura exploit that? Queen b1 from Nakamura, and I don't like that move. My old coach, as I've said before, backward moves are always bad, and here black has an excellent position. Instead, maybe simply play something like king h1 or f3, as I already mentioned. I think that would have been slightly better, but I guess Nakamura was afraid of something like bishop g5 and knight e3, where it's going to be very difficult to win. He might hold the game, but he's not going to win, and he needs a victory. So he plays queen b1. Bishop g5, rook c2, and look at his awkward placed pieces here. Very awkward, every single piece. And black has an excellent position after the move queen b3, attacking the pawn on a4 here. And things are turning more and more difficult for Hikaru Nakamura, who desperately needs a victory. So can he do it? He plays a5, but now knight b4 is coming, and Lagrave is winning an exchange here. So rook c1 is forced, bishop takes c1, rook takes c1, and the computer gives an edge of -3 for Lagrave, which is not surprising considering the fact that he is an exchange up. Can Nakamura bounce back? Remember, the draw is not enough for him. He needs to win. So knight d5, f3, takes. At least this is fairly desirable. Now I can play rook e1 and put some pressure on e6. But of course, we're down material. Things are not looking too great. Queen b5 from Lagrave, rook e1, putting some pressure on e6, rook e8. And the advantage has already gone down a little bit, so the advantage is not more than -1 till 1.5. Still huge advantage, but it's not so easy, because suddenly I'm starting to have tactics here. For example, rook takes e6 followed by bishop d5 in some lines. Let's say if I play rook queen a2, as Nakamura did here, rook takes e6 is a threat you have to be careful of. And after king h8, the position is all of a sudden equal after the move bishop h5, which is absolutely crazy considering the fact that the computer gave -3 just a few moves ago. And that's what happens when you play Blitz. Everything can change out of nowhere. Things are all of a sudden entirely different. And I do believe Lagrave was very nervous at this point. Like, there's something that happens to you psychologically when you know that you have a winning position, but you realize that you've started to mess everything up, and it makes you angry usually, and then you play slightly worse because you are angry. Happens to me a lot, and it's quite common, especially in Blitz. And yeah, let's see how the game continued with rook e7, and after knight h4, black is under severe pressure despite being an exchange up. So now knight g6 is a threat, knight f5 is a threat in some cases. For example, king g8, knight takes f5 have a crushing position for white, because you cannot take it, because then I take the rook and the knight here is pinned by the queen on a2, who all of a sudden has showed up, as we did see earlier with queen a2. So king h7 is played, and that is a bad move from Lagrave, who once again falls for the tactics and the position. So instead he had to play the sad move of rook e8 and just accept that he had blundered. And after rook takes, the position is probably fairly equal. And remember, there is no c4 because I can play queen b4, attacking the rook on e1. And yeah, it might even be better. Oh, sorry, I'm playing a bad, messing up a little bit. It might have even been better here to play bishop f7 to keep things complicated instead of trading on e8, because the light squared bishop is very strong. But king h7 happened, and now the beautiful move, bishop g6, would have more or less led to a winning advantage here. But remember, this is Blitz, and Nakamura plays knight g6, just quickly showing that after bishop g6, king h8, bishop takes f5 would have been possible because of knight g6 and knight takes e7. And if black would play king g8, knight takes f5, it would have been possible, similar to what I showed you earlier. So knight g6, rook c7. This is a bad move. The best move here would have been to play rook e8, and after something like knight e5, rook e7, the position is still very complicated, but objectively it is even. So rook c7, rook knight e5. I'm a bit unsure why Nakamura did not take the pawn on e6. Surprises me a little bit, but I'm sure he found something he didn't like, something like knight b4. That is kind of an annoying move to get against you, because you cannot take the rook because of rook c1 is mate pretty much instantly. That is something that you cannot allow. Then you would have to play something like queen b1 or queen a3, but then knight d3 is possible, and there's a lot of tricks here and a lot of things to watch out for, and when you're playing Blitz it's unpleasant. So knight e5 makes sense. King g8 from Lagrave. He now controls the f7 square, and he controls most of the stuff in this diagonal as well. So maybe he has gotten things under control. And indeed, the computer thinks he is slightly better here. Knight g6 from Nakamura. King h7. And this is a poor move, because now Lagrave has allowed Nakamura to take the pawn on e6. I guess they were moving back and forth here. For some reason, I didn't notice that instantly. But well, the only difference is that the rook is on c7. Yeah, I guess he thought that he has control, but apparently it's not as simple as he thought. So yeah, better move, simply protect the pawn on e6 with queen d7. And black is still doing well, although the position is very complicated, a lot more complicated than it should have been. But it is Blitz. So king h7, rook takes e6, and things are looking good now for a Hikaru Nakamura who needs a victory in order to stay in this match. And can he do it? Knight f6 from Lagrave, attacking the bishop on h5. Bishop e2 attacking the queen. Queen d5 now. And things are looking harder and harder for Maxime Vachier Lagrave here, who probably should have played queen d7. But after that, knight e5 is looking quite obnoxious. But after queen b1 and knight e4, he still has a finger in the game. Like, it's not over yet. He can also put the queen on g5, protect on f5. He's under severe pressure, and it's extremely difficult to defend in practice. It might not even be possible to defend, but it is a better try than queen d5. Although queen d5 is a very logical way to try to defend. Taking the queen and bishop d3 is very strong, because now the pawn on f5 will probably fall, because after rook f7, we can play knight e5, as Nakamura does, and then rook d6. I'm sure g4 was possible at some point. Maybe in the previous move, like here, this looks like a possible try to me. Because if I take back, knight e7 comes, and I win the rook on c8, or even the knight on d5. Nice choice there. So g4 is very possible. If you have to play something like rook f6, that wouldn't really work, because if bishop takes f5, and there's too many threats here. This would be winning for white after, for example, rook takes e6, knight f4, and then bishop takes e6, attacking the knight and rook. But knight e5 was played, rook f8, rook d6, knight e3, rook d7, and it's very difficult for Lagrave. Look at that beautiful knight on e5. Look at these pawns here. Look at the pawn on a5. Look at all of these weak pawns. This is a very difficult position to defend, and Indeed, the computer gives an advantage of more than +3 for Hikaru Nakamura. So rook b8, rook d6 from Nakamura. A little bit surprising, but of course, again, it's Blitz, which is probably something I've said 5 times already. The best move would have been to play g4, which is a computer move. You're just going to take the pawn on f5, and things are far too weak around the black king. But rook d6 was played, rook c8, rook b6, rook c7, king f2 from Nakamura pushes away the knight on e3, knight e5, attacking the rook on b6, rook d6, knight e7, and here knight d7, attacking the rook, but he also wants to jump to c5 and maybe e6 as well. So rook f7, knight c5, and he has great control over everything here. Lagrave just has to wait, knight c6, b4. Look at this great pawn chain right here. Very, very strong pawn chain. Beautiful knight on c5, great bishop on d3. g6 here, protecting f5. h4 now with the plan of h5. Lagrave plays knight e7, bishop c4, attacking the rook. Rook g7, bishop b3, knight e6 could become a threat, but you gotta be careful so you do not lose the pawn on c3. Rook c6, rook d7, knight c8. It is starting to look very, very bad for Lagrave. Takes on g7, king takes g7, bishop d5, and the rook moves to c7. But after rook c7, the fork knight e6 decides the game. Black blunders the rook, but no matter if he had played something like rook d6, bishop takes b7, knight a7, and bishop takes a6 is completely winning because of all of these pawns. Very unfortunate for Lagrave, who could have decided the match here. He was so close. If we go back a little bit, the position after queen b1, and here the position is absolutely hopeless for Nakamura. But he got a lot of compensation here, and the best move for black would have been to play b6 and just get rid of this pawn, because this pawn is quite strong. It takes some nice squares, but more importantly, when you play b6 here, you do open up the b file as well, which is quite significant, because when you are a rook up or an exchange up, you want to utilize those rooks, and those rooks are not very effective if they do not really have any squares and open files. But if they do, they are much better than the bishops or knights. But if they do not, they can quickly become inferior to the bishops and knights, as we did see in the game. And if we go forward a few moves, the position is already equal after just 3 moves. And in this position, the computer can say -1 or +1 or whatever. Black has made it significantly more complicated for himself. And of course, as it is a blitz game, it's very difficult in practice. So well executed by Nakamura there, and he is going to be playing Vachier in the semi-final. Stay tuned for that.